Gianni Rogers had learned 3 rules about being invisible. Keep your head down, don't ask questions about the past, and never ever expect your life to make sense. For 17 years, those rules had kept her safe in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, working her bookkeeping job, navigating the world from her wheelchair with the kind of quiet determination that came from surviving what should have killed you. But the moment 15 black SUVs rolled into the cemetery where her father lay in a $200 thrift store suit, every rule detonated like a bomb. Because the man stepping out of the lead vehicle wasn't a mourner. He was Bonano Ricci, a name she'd heard whispered in news reports, always preceded by words like alleged and untouchable and organized crime. He walked through the rain like he owned the ground beneath his feet, past the 11 people who'd bothered to show up, past the priest who'd stopped mid-prayer, straight to her wheelchair, and when he knelt in the mud and said, "Your father was my partner," Gianni Rogers realized something terrifying. She'd been living someone else's lie. And behind Bonano, Alphonse, her boyfriend of 8 months, the 32-year-old man she'd been planning a future with, stood with a gun under his jacket and guilt written across his face like a confession. Growing up, Gianni had exactly 1 photograph of her mother. It sat on her father's nightstand in their cramped apartment, a woman with dark hair and a smile that suggested she knew secrets worth keeping. George Rogers never talked about the accident that killed her. Never talked about the drunk driver who'd supposedly swerved into their lane when Gianni was 7, turning a family of 3 into a family of 2 and leaving a little girl unable to walk. George worked 3 jobs: maintenance, night security, weekend handyman gigs, always moving, always exhausted, always apologizing that he couldn't give Gianni more. They lived in rent-controlled housing in Brooklyn, shopped at discount stores, ate pasta 4 nights a week. George fixed everything himself because hiring help was a luxury they couldn't afford. "We're survivors," he'd tell her when she was younger and asked why other kids had nicer things. "We don't need fancy. We need each other." Gianni believed him. Even at 30, working as a bookkeeper for small businesses, living independently but still visiting her father every Sunday, she believed all of it. Until Bonano Ricci's convoy turned her father's funeral into a crime scene. The SUVs emptied like a military operation. Men in $1,000 suits fanned out across the cemetery, earpieces visible, eyes scanning for threats. Mourners scattered. The priest backed away from the casket. Gianni sat frozen in her wheelchair, rain soaking through her cheap black dress, as Bonano approached. Up close, he looked like someone had carved him from marble and given him a pulse. Silver hair, expensive cologne, and eyes that had seen things that would break most people. "Gianni Rogers," he said, his voice carrying a Brooklyn accent that had been refined, but never erased. "Your father spoke of you often. I don't know you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, but I knew George, for 37 years, since we were boys running numbers in Bensonhurst." Bonano's expression softened, just slightly. "He was the smartest man I ever met. We called him the architect." The world tilted. "My father was a maintenance worker." "Your father," Bonano said carefully, "was the man who designed the financial infrastructure for the 5 families. He didn't fix buildings, Gianni. He built empires." She wanted to laugh. Wanted to tell this man he had the wrong George Rogers. But then she saw Alphonse, 32-year-old Alphonse, who'd spent 8 months talking about moving in together, about futures and trust, standing with Bonano's guards. His hand rested casually near a shoulder holster she'd never known existed. Their eyes met across the rain-soaked cemetery. Alphonse's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Didn't even pretend to be surprised she'd seen him. A man she'd let into every corner of her life, who knew her body, her fears, her dreams, standing there like a stranger in an expensive suit. "No," Gianni whispered. "I'm sorry," Bonano said, "and somehow that made it worse. But we need to leave. Now. The people who killed your mother, the people who put you in that chair, they know George is dead, and they're coming for you." Gianni's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests so hard her knuckles went white. "My mother died in a car accident." Bonano stood, rain dripping from his silver hair. "Your mother died in a car bomb. There's a difference. And if you want to live long enough to understand why, you'll come with me." If you're not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Please, hit that button right now as we witness how Gianni transforms from the girl everyone underestimated into the woman nobody will ever forget. Bonano's estate looked like something out of a movie Gianni couldn't afford to see in theaters. Marble everything, chandeliers that probably cost more than her entire apartment building, and enough armed guards to invade a small country. They'd installed her in a guest suite with a bathroom bigger than her bedroom back home, and for 20 minutes, she sat in her wheelchair staring at gold-plated faucets, trying to process the fact that her entire life had been a performance she hadn't auditioned for. The knock on the door was soft, apologetic. She knew who it was before he spoke. "Gianni, please, let me explain." She should have told him to go to hell. Should have screamed, thrown something, made a scene worthy of the betrayal. Instead, she unlocked the door and wheeled backward, watching as Alphonse Batista, the man who'd held her through panic attacks and knew exactly how she took her coffee, stepped inside, looking like a stranger in an expensive suit. 8 months, she said flatly. "You were assigned to me 8 months ago." Alphonse closed the door behind him, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain, dangerous somehow, without the graduate student disguise. "Yes, the coffee shop, our meet cute, you asking about my book, all of it, planned." His voice was quiet. "Your father was worried. There'd been chatter. The Calabrese family was making moves. He wanted someone close to you, someone who could spy on me." The laugh that came out of her was bitter enough to strip paint. Monitor the cripple? Make sure she wasn't getting into trouble between physical therapy and TurboTax? Protect you. Alphonse took a step closer, then stopped when she held up her hand. "Gianni, the threats were real, are real. Someone tried to kill you when you were 7. George spent every day of the last 17 years making sure they couldn't finish the job. She wanted to throw something at his stupidly handsome face, wanted to hate him with the kind of pure, uncomplicated rage that would make this easier. Did he pay you extra for the sex? Was there a bonus structure for making me fall in love with you?" Alphonse flinched like she'd slapped him. "Good. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Alphonse?" She wheeled forward, not caring that tears were streaming down her face now. "Help me understand. Which part of you loved me? The part that was following orders? Or the part that pitied the girl in the chair?" "None of it." His voice cracked. "Neither of those things. Gianni, I was supposed to keep my distance. Befriend you, monitor threats, report back. That was the job. But you," he ran a hand through his hair, and she hated that she still found the gesture attractive. "You were so damn smart and funny. You made jokes about accessibility ramps that had me laughing in the middle of surveillance reports. You cried at that documentary about the octopus and then immediately made fun of yourself for crying. You were real. The only real thing in my entire fake life." "How convenient," Gianni said coldly. "The bodyguard falls for his assignment. What a unique story. I'm sure it's never happened before in the history of lying to women. I told your father I was compromised." Alphonse's hands clenched into fists at his sides. 3 months in, I told him I was developing feelings and requested reassignment. He said no, said you'd notice if I disappeared, and that would put you at risk. So I stayed, and I fell harder. "Get out." "No." The single word hung in the air between them like a challenge. "Excuse me?" Gianni's voice went dangerously quiet. "I'm not leaving you unprotected." Alphonse's jaw set in that stubborn way she used to find endearing. "The Calabrese family knows George is dead. They'll move fast. I don't need anything from you." She wheeled toward him, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the genuine fear, close enough to hurt him the way he'd hurt her, except honesty. "And you can't give me that, can you? Because everything about you is a lie. Your name, your job, your feelings. So let me be crystal clear, Alphonse. Or whoever you really are, get the hell out of my room." "My name is real," he said quietly. "Alphonse Batista, born in the Bronx, former Marine. And every time I told you I loved you, I meant it. Even knowing I shouldn't, even knowing it made me terrible at my job." "You mean you're not leaving your assignment?" Gianni said, each word a blade. "That's what this is. You can't leave because Bonano's paying you. Not because you care." Alphonse looked at her for a long moment, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he turned and walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "I'd take a bullet for you and die happy. Whether you believe that or not is up to you." The door closed with a soft click, and Gianni Rogers, alone in a mansion built on lies, finally let herself fall apart. Bonano found her at 3 a.m. in the estate's library, still wearing her funeral dress, surrounded by leather-bound books. She was too numb to read. He entered without knocking. carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than Gianni herself, and set it on the mahogany desk with the kind of reverence people usually reserved for sacred objects. "Your father asked me to give you this after he died," Bonano said, settling into the chair across from her. "I promised him I'd wait until you were ready. But given that the Calabrese family doesn't respect grief periods, we're out of time." Gianni stared at the briefcase like it might explode. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised. "What's in it? More lies? A certificate of authenticity proving my entire childhood was bullshit? Your inheritance." Bonano opened the case with a soft click. Inside were documents, USB drives, and a tablet. "George left you $47 million, property holdings in 4 states, and his seat on the 5 Families Council." The library spun. Gianni gripped her wheelchair's armrests. "I'm sorry, did you just say million with an M?" He was very good at his job. His job was fixing toilets. His job, Bonano corrected gently, was designing financial systems that moved billions without triggering federal oversight. The toilets were cover. Very convincing cover, apparently. Gianni laughed, high and slightly unhinged. "Of course. Why would my father actually fix toilets when he could just pretend to fix toilets while secretly being a criminal mastermind? That's so much more normal." Bonano's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. "There's more." George kept files. Insurance, he called it. Blackmail material, evidence, leverage on everyone who ever crossed him or posed a threat. Politicians, judges, rival families, federal agents on various payrolls. He documented everything. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Because he loved you." Bonano pushed the tablet toward her. "And he knew that one day the truth would come out. He wanted you to have options. Power, protection." He paused. "He left you a message. Do you want me to stay while you watch it?" Gianni looked at the black screen of the tablet, her father's final words waiting behind it like a ghost. "No, I need to do this alone." Bonano stood, moving toward the door with surprising grace for a man his size. "I'll have guards posted outside. You're safe here, Gianni. I promise you that." After he left, Gianni sat in the silence for 10 full minutes before she found the courage to press play. Her father appeared on screen, thinner than she remembered, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. He wore his usual work shirt, though she could see now it was carefully worn, deliberately ordinary. Everything about him had been a costume. "Hello, sweetheart." George's voice cracked, and Gianni's heart broke all over again. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and Bonano's told you the truth." "I'm sorry. God, Gianni, I'm so sorry." She watched through tears as her father explained it all. The Calabrese family, the bomb that killed her mother, how the attack was meant to eliminate George's entire bloodline because he'd discovered their plan to betray the 5 families, how he'd gone underground, faked poverty, buried himself in normalcy to keep her alive. "You were 7 years old, and you just lost your mother and your ability to walk, and I made you lose everything else too," George said, wiping his own eyes. "No birthday parties, no friends who could be leveraged, no college campus where you'd be exposed. I trapped you in a small life because I was terrified of losing you, and I hate myself for it." Gianni sobbed openly now, not caring about dignity or strength or any of it. "But here's what I know about you, baby girl." George leaned forward, his expression fierce. "You're stronger than you know, stronger than I ever was. You survived what should have killed you. You built a life with nothing but determination and spite. You never let that wheelchair define you, even when the world tried to make it your only story." He pulled out a piece of paper, his hands shaking slightly. "The Calabrese family is still out there, still dangerous, still the reason your mother is dead and you can't walk. I've left you everything you need to destroy them, evidence that would put 3 generations in prison, financial records that would collapse their empire. The choice is yours." George looked directly into the camera, and Gianni felt like he was seeing her across time and death. "If you want justice, take it. If you want out, run. Bonano will give you a new identity, clean money, a fresh start anywhere in the world. Either way, you're my daughter, and I'm so damn proud of you. I love you, Gianni. I'm sorry I couldn't say it enough while I was alive." The screen went black. Gianni watched it again, and again, and again. 17 times total, until she'd memorized every word, every pause, every moment where her father's voice broke with love and regret. By the time dawnlight crept through the library windows, she'd made her decision. The Calabrese family had taken her mother, her mobility, and 17 years of her life. It was time to take something back. 1 week. Bonano gave her 1 week to decide if she wanted to be Gianni Rogers, civilian with a trust fund and a fake passport, or Gianni Rogers, heiress to a criminal empire with a target painted on her back in neon colors. She spent day 1 crying. Day 2 rage cleaning her guest suite until the staff politely asked her to stop because she was making them look bad. Day 3, researching the Calabrese family online like a true millennial, which turned out to be equal parts terrifying and absurd. These people had Yelp reviews for their legitimate businesses, and they were somehow worse at customer service than they were at murder. By day 4, she'd started venturing out of her room. Bonano's compound operated like a small city-state. There were cleaning crews, kitchen staff, gardeners, mechanics, and an entire security apparatus that made the Secret Service look understaffed. Everyone treated her with careful respect, like she was either royalty or a bomb that might detonate, possibly both. She caught Alphonse watching her from a distance at least a dozen times a day. He never approached, never spoke, just existed in her peripheral vision like a very attractive, very guilty ghost. "He hasn't slept since you got here," one of the housekeepers, Rosa, mentioned while bringing Gianni breakfast on day 5. "Stands outside your door most nights, changes shift with the guards but never actually leaves." "That's called stalking," Gianni said, stabbing her omelet with more force than necessary. "That's called a man in love with terrible timing," Rosa corrected, then left before Gianni could throw a croissant at her. Day 6 brought the dinner. Bonano hosted weekly meetings with his captains, the men who ran various aspects of his organization. He invited Gianni to observe, framing it as educational, but really meaning, let's see if George's daughter inherited anything besides his cheekbones. The dining room could have hosted a state dinner. 14 men in expensive suits, all of them older than Gianni, all of them radiating the kind of casual menace that came from never hearing the word no without consequences. She wheeled to the table in a dress Rosa had insisted she wear black, elegant, and probably worth more than her car. The stares ranged from curious to dismissive to outright hostile. "Gentlemen," Bonano said from the head of the table, "this is Gianni Rogers, George's daughter. She's here to observe." "Observe what, exactly?" asked DeMarco, a captain with slicked back hair and a face like a cement block. "How real business is done." Gianni smiled sweetly. "I observe things for a living, DeMarco. I'm a bookkeeper. Numbers are kind of my thing." The dinner progressed with discussions of territory, shipments, and legitimate business fronts. Gianni stayed quiet, listening, analyzing. These men spoke in code and implication, but the underlying structures were familiar: cash flow, profit margins, risk assessment. Her father had taught her to see patterns in numbers. She just hadn't known he was teaching her to read criminal empires. Halfway through the second course, a captain named Sullivan presented financial reports from a casino operation in Atlantic City. Revenues up 18%. Clean operation. The family running it is staying in their lane. Gianni tilted her head, studying the numbers he'd passed around. Something nagged at her. "May I?" She gestured to the report. Sullivan looked at Bonano, who nodded. She scanned the columns, cross-referencing figures in her head the way she'd done 1,000 times for her freelance clients. "Your revenue's up 18%, but your operating costs only increased 4%. That's unusual for a casino labor. Utilities, licensing fees all typically scale with volume. And your reported table game revenue specifically jumped 23%, but slot revenue only moved 11%. The table went silent. "So?" DeMarco said. "So someone's skimming," Gianni said simply. "They're reporting inflated table game numbers because those are harder to audit: cash transactions, tips, dealer discretion. But they're probably pocketing the difference and hoping you're too busy counting the overall increase to notice the margins don't make sense." Sullivan's face went pale. I'll have our people look into that." Bonano leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at his lips. "You're George's daughter? Thank you for noticing." Gianni took a sip of wine, feeling a rush of something dangerous: power, maybe, or validation, possibly both. "This is ridiculous." DeMarco threw his napkin on the table. "We're taking advice from a—" "Careful." Alphonse's voice cut through from where he stood by the wall with the other guards. His hand hadn't moved toward his weapon, but the threat was implicit. DeMarco ignored him, turning to Gianni. "From a cripple playing dress-up. You think reading some numbers makes you one of us? You think sitting in that chair makes you qualified to—" Gianni didn't let him finish. She wheeled forward, grabbed her wine glass, and dumped the entire contents, a very nice Barolo, probably older than her, directly into DeMarco's lap. The room exploded into chaos. Guards moved. Captains stood. DeMarco lunged up, his chair crashing backward. "I can't walk, DeMarco," Gianni said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "But I can ruin you. I can pull your financials, find every dime you've ever skimmed, every deal you've made off the books, every mistress you're paying rent for while your wife thinks you're working late. I can gift wrap it for the IRS with a bow. Or I can do much worse, I can tell Bonano." She smiled, all teeth. "Test me." DeMarco stood there, wine dripping down his $1,000 pants, rage and fear warring on his face. Finally, he looked at Bonano. "Are you going to let her—" "Apologize," Bonano said quietly. "What?" "You disrespected George's daughter at my table. Apologize. Now." The silence stretched like taffy. Finally, DeMarco bit out, "My apologies, Miss Rogers." "That's better." Gianni wheeled back to her spot. "And for what it's worth, I found 3 more discrepancies in your reports. We should talk." After the wine incident, Gianni became something of a legend in Bonano's compound. The staff whispered about her with a mix of admiration and terror. The guards nodded respectfully when she passed. DeMarco avoided eye contact like she might turn him to stone. And Alphonse? Alphonse continued haunting her like a well-dressed, heavily armed specter who knew exactly how she took her coffee. She'd catch glimpses of him everywhere, standing post outside the library while she pored over her father's files, trailing 3 steps behind when she wheeled through the gardens, present but distant, protective but punished, like a dog that had been scolded but refused to leave its owner's side. It was driving her absolutely insane. Day 8, because apparently her 1-week deadline had become more of a suggestion, Gianni found herself unable to sleep. Again, she'd been having the same nightmare on loop. Her mother's face, the sound of an explosion, her 7-year-old self waking up in a hospital unable to feel her legs. Except now her father was there too, and Alphonse, and they were all apologizing while the Calabrese family laughed in the background. She wheeled out to the compound's garden around 2 in the morning, hoping the cool air would quiet her brain. Of course, Alphonse was already there, standing in the shadows near the fountain like the world's most dedicated stalker. "Do you ever sleep?" she called out, too exhausted for subtlety. He stepped into the moonlight, looking tired and gorgeous and infuriating. "Not much lately. Join the club. We have insomnia and trust issues." She wheeled closer, hating how her heart still did that stupid flutter thing when she looked at him. "You know, most bodyguards maintain professional distance. They don't lurk in gardens at 2 a.m. looking like a cologne advertisement. Most clients don't dump wine on made men at dinner." The corner of his mouth twitched. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Why not both? She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the dark circles under his eyes. "You look terrible." "Thank you. You look beautiful." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't do that. Don't say things that sound real when I don't know what real is anymore." Alphonse's expression cracked, just slightly. "Gianni, did you fake all of it?" The question exploded out of her like she'd been holding it underwater. "Every laugh, every kiss, every time you told me I was brilliant or beautiful or worth loving, was any of it real? Or am I just the world's most pathetic mark?" "Jesus, Gianni, no. Because I need to know." She was crying now, angry tears that she couldn't stop. "I need to know if the best 8 months of my life were just you doing your job really, really well. If you practiced in a mirror. If there's some bodyguard manual that says, Chapter 7, making the target fall in love with you for optimal compliance." Alphonse dropped to his knees in front of her wheelchair, and the movement was so sudden, so raw, that she stopped mid-breath. "I faked the meet cute," he said, his voice breaking. "I faked the coincidences. I faked being a graduate student writing a thesis on urban architecture. I faked liking that terrible indie band you dragged me to see." She let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "But I didn't fake falling for you." He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "I didn't fake the night you told me about your mom, and I held you till you stopped shaking. I didn't fake laughing so hard at your tax season jokes that I choked on my coffee. I didn't fake any of the nights we stayed up talking until sunrise, or the way I'd catch myself watching you work and thinking I'd never met anyone more fascinating in my entire life. Alphonse, I was supposed to keep my distance." His hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair like he was drowning and she was the life raft. "Befriend you. Monitor threats. Report back. That was the assignment. But you, God, Gianni, you were so completely yourself. You made jokes about accessibility ramps that gutted me. You cried at animal videos and then got mad at yourself for crying. You were brilliant and funny and kind, and you never, not once, let your wheelchair be an excuse for anything. How convenient, she whispered, but her voice had lost its edge. I told your father I was compromised. Alphonse's laugh was bitter. 3 months in, I sat in his maintenance closet, which I now realize was probably bugged with equipment worth more than my salary, and I told him I was falling in love with his daughter and needed reassignment. You know what he said? Gianni shook her head. He said, "Good. Now you'll actually die for her instead of just being willing to." Then he told me if I ever hurt you, he'd kill me himself. Slowly. Alphonse wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I was ready for that. After you found out, I stood in Bonano's office and told him to do it, that I'd betrayed George's trust by catching feelings. He laughed at me. Of course he did, Gianni said softly. My father always did like irony. How do I believe you? The question came out small, vulnerable, nothing like the woman who dumped wine on a Mafia captain. Alphonse looked at her for a long moment, moonlight catching the tears on his face. You don't, not yet, but I'll earn it, even if it takes the rest of my life. He stood slowly, backing away. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll keep you alive anyway, because that's what you do when you love someone, even if they can't love you back. He turned to leave. Alphonse, he stopped. The indie band wasn't terrible. You just have bad taste. She saw his shoulders shake with what might have been a laugh or a sob, noted. After he disappeared into the darkness, Gianni sat by the fountain for another hour, her father's words echoing in her head. You're stronger than you know. Maybe strong enough to forgive. Maybe not, but definitely strong enough to survive whatever came next. The intelligence came in at dawn on day 9, delivered by one of Bonano's lieutenants, who looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Gianni was in the library, her new permanent residence, apparently surrounded by her father's files, 3 empty coffee cups, and the growing realization that George Rogers had been both brilliant and absolutely terrifying. Bonano entered without his usual composure, Alphonse and 2 other guards flanking him. That alone told her something was very, very wrong. The Calabrese family knows, Bonano said without preamble. They've confirmed George is dead, and they know you're here. Gianni's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. How? Does it matter? Bonano moved to the window, checking the grounds like enemies might materialize from thin air. They're planning something. Our sources indicate a major operation within the next 72 hours. They want to eliminate both of us in one move, decapitate my organization, and end George's bloodline. 2 birds, 1 very violent stone. Poetic, Gianni muttered, her mind already racing through scenarios, probabilities, escape routes. Apparently her father had downloaded his paranoia directly into her DNA. We're moving you to a safe house, Bonano continued. Remote location, skeleton crew, full security protocols. You'll be on a plane within the hour. No. The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. Every person in the room turned to stare at her. Gianni, Alphonse started, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. This isn't negotiable. If they hit the compound, then they hit the compound. She wheeled forward, her jaw set. I'm not running. This isn't about bravery, Bonano said, and for the first time since she'd met him, he sounded genuinely concerned. This is about survival. The Calabrese family has resources, manpower, and 17 years of hatred fueling them. They'll come with everything they have. Good. Gianni's hands clenched on her wheelchair's armrests. I'm tired of hiding. My father spent 17 years hiding me. 17 years of no friends, no college experience, no life outside a 50-block radius because he was terrified they'd find me. And you know what? They found me anyway. So what was the point? The point was keeping you alive, Alphonse said quietly. No, the point was keeping me small. She looked at each of them in turn. Safe and small and invisible. Well, I'm done being invisible. The Calabrese family killed my mother. They put me in this chair. They stole my childhood and my father's life and any chance I had at normalcy. And now they want to finish the job? She smiled cold and sharp. Let them try. Bonano studied her for a long moment, and she could practically see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he said, You're as insane as your father. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't one, but there was something like respect in his eyes. If you stay, you follow my security protocols. No arguments, no exceptions. Agreed. On one condition. Gianni gestured to the files surrounding her. "I want full access to everything my father left. Every file, every contact, every piece of leverage he collected. If they're coming, I want to know exactly who's coming and what they're afraid of." Before we continue with what happened next, and trust me, you'll want to hear what Gianni discovered in those files, I need to know. Are you as invested in this story as I am? Because what comes next is going to blow your mind. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single moment of Gianni's transformation from victim to absolute force of nature. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I love knowing this story is reaching people all over the world. Now, back to the compound, where Gianni was about to become very, very dangerous. Bonano hesitated, then nodded to one of his guards. "Bring her everything. The encrypted drives, the physical files, all of it." "Bonano," Alphonse protested. "She's right." Bonano cut him off. "George didn't leave her those files as decoration. He left them because he knew she'd need them. And maybe," he looked at Gianni with something approaching wonder, "maybe because he knew she'd actually use them." For the next 48 hours, Gianni lived in those files. She learned things that made her father's double life seem quaint by comparison. George Rogers hadn't just documented the Calabrese family's crimes, he'd documented everyone's crimes. Judges taking bribes, politicians with offshore accounts, rival family members with secret addictions, and even more secret bank accounts. FBI agents who looked the other way for the right price. Her father had built a nuclear arsenal of information, and he'd left the launch codes to his 30-year-old daughter, who'd spent the last decade filing tax returns for small businesses. The irony wasn't lost on her. She learned the Calabrese family structure, who reported to whom, who handled enforcement, who managed the money. She learned about Vincent Calabrese, the patriarch who'd ordered the hit on her mother, about his son Paolo, who'd personally built the bomb, about his nephew Luca, who now ran operations and was, according to her father's notes, ambitious, reckless, and stupid, a dangerous combination. She learned their legitimate businesses, their money laundering operations, their weaknesses and debts, and the intricate web of favors and threats that held their empire together, and she learned how to destroy it all. "If they're coming," she told Bonano, on the evening of day 11, surrounded by documents and determination, "let them come. But we'll be ready, and when this is over, the Calabrese family is going to wish they'd left George Rogers' daughter alone." Alphonse stood in the corner, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or terror. Possibly both. "You know," he said quietly, "your father would be terrified of you right now." Gianni smiled. "Good, that's how I know I'm doing it right." Gianni found Protocol Omega at 2 a.m. on day 12, buried in a password-protected folder within a password-protected folder, within what her father had labeled Gianni's graduation photos, which was darkly hilarious considering she'd never graduated from anything because he'd kept her locked down tighter than a maximum security prison. The file opened with a video message. Of course it did. Her father had apparently believed in dramatic reveals even from beyond the grave. George appeared on screen, and this recording was different from the last one. Older, maybe, more tired. He looked directly into the camera like he was staring into her soul across time and death. "If you found this, sweetheart, then things have gone very, very wrong. This is Protocol Omega, my insurance policy, my doomsday weapon, the thing I built to protect you but prayed you'd never need to use." Gianni's hands trembled as she clicked through the attached files. There were hundreds of them, thousands, court documents, financial records, surveillance photos, audio recordings, video evidence. Her father had compiled a complete case against the Calabrese family, spanning 3 decades, every murder, every bribe, every money laundering operation, every legitimate business they'd corrupted. But it wasn't just the Calabreses. The files included evidence that would implicate dozens of other people. Corrupt politicians who'd taken their money, law enforcement who'd looked the other way, judges who'd thrown cases, rival families who'd partnered with them on various operations. "Protocol Omega is automated," George's voice continued. "One button press, and everything uploads simultaneously to the FBI, the New York Times, the Washington Post, every major news outlet, and secure servers accessible to every rival family in the 5 families. The Calabrese empire will collapse within hours." "But Gianni," his expression grew grave, "the fallout will be catastrophic. People will go to prison. Empires will fall. The entire power structure of organized crime in New York will destabilize." You'll make enemies of everyone who benefits from the status quo. The video ended with her father's last words. Use it only if you have no other choice. And if you do use it, make sure you're ready for what comes after. I love you. I'm sorry I left you with this. Gianni stared at the screen for a long moment, then did the only logical thing. She wheeled herself to Bonano's study at 2:30 in the morning and banged on his door until he answered. He opened it in a bathrobe, holding a gun, looking like a mob boss who'd been interrupted mid-beauty sleep. This better be. I found Protocol Omega. The gun lowered. Ah, come in. 5 minutes later, Bonano, Alphonse, and 3 of Bonano's top lieutenants were crowded into the study, while Gianni explained what her father had built. She watched their expressions shift from confusion to understanding to something approaching awe/terror. Your father, Bonano said slowly, was more dangerous than I realized. And I already thought he was the most dangerous man I'd ever met. It's brilliant, one of the lieutenants murmured, scrolling through the files on the tablet. Completely insane, but brilliant. It's a nuclear option, Alphonse said flatly, his jaw tight. You use this. And you don't just hurt the Calabreses. You hurt everyone. People we do business with. People who've been neutral. The entire ecosystem collapses. Good, Gianni said. The room went silent. Bonano leaned back in his chair, studying her. You understand what you're saying? If you activate this, you're not just declaring war on the Calabrese family. You're declaring war on the old way of doing things. The code, the structure, everything that's kept this world functioning for 100 years. You'll make enemies of people who are currently neutral or even friendly. I already have enemies, Gianni said quietly. The Calabrese family murdered my mother and put me in this chair when I was 7 years old. They stole 17 years of my life, and now they're coming to finish what they started. So yes, Bonano, I understand exactly what I'm saying. She wheeled closer to the desk, her eyes hard. My father built this system because he knew the only way to protect me was to make sure my death would cost them everything. Well, I'm not planning on dying, but I am planning on making them wish they'd never heard the name Rogers. Before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, you need to hear this, hit that subscribe button right now, because what Gianni's about to do will change everything, and you don't want to miss a single second. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Are you Team Use Protocol Omega, or Team Find Another Way? Let me know, because Gianni's decision is about to get very, very real. There's another consideration, Bonano said carefully. If you activate this, you can't take it back. The information goes out to everyone simultaneously. Law enforcement will move on multiple fronts. The press will have a field day, and every family that gets caught in the crossfire will know you did it. Will they come after me? Probably. Eventually, after they're done dealing with their own collapsed empires and federal investigations. Bonano's expression was unreadable. But you'll have leverage, because if they move against you, you clearly have more files, more insurance. They'll be afraid of what else George left you. Gianni considered this. So I become too dangerous to kill. You become untouchable, one of the lieutenants corrected. Like your father was, the architect, the man with all the secrets, the woman with all the secrets, Gianni corrected. Let's be accurate. Alphonse, who'd been silent during most of this, finally spoke. And if the Calabreses don't give you a choice, if they force your hand, Gianni looked at him, and something in her expression made him flinch. Then I push the button, and I watch their empire burn. When? Bonano asked. When what? When do you activate Protocol Omega? After they attack? During? We need a trigger point. Gianni thought about her father's video, his warning about the fallout, his faith that she was strong enough to handle this. She thought about her mother, who she barely remembered, about 17 years in a wheelchair, 17 years of a small, careful life. I'll activate it when I'm ready, she said finally. But I want it set up and ready to launch at a moment's notice. If they're coming in 72 hours, we have 71 hours to prepare. And if they don't give you a choice? Alphonse pressed. If it happens fast? Gianni smiled, cold and certain. Then they'll learn what George Rogers' daughter is capable of, one way or another. The memorial dinner for George Rogers was supposed to be intimate, just Bonano's inner circle, some of George's old associates, and Gianni, who'd spent 3 hours getting ready because apparently facing down the Mafia required the right dress and perfect lipstick. Rosa had insisted, and Gianni had learned not to argue with Rosa about anything fashion-related. Alphonse stood post near the dining room entrance in a tuxedo that should have been illegal, and Gianni pretended not to notice how good he looked while also absolutely noticing how good he looked. They'd reached an uneasy truce over the past few days, not quite forgiveness, but something softer than rage, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Bonano raised his glass. To George Rogers, the architect, a man who protected what he loved with everything he had. May we all. The first explosion turned the east wall into shrapnel and screaming. Everything happened in slow motion and fast-forward simultaneously. The lights cut out. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red, emergency lighting that made the scene look like a horror movie. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, coordinated, professional, overwhelming. The Calabrese family had come with everything they had. Bonano's guards returned fire, creating a perimeter around the dining room. People dove for cover. Someone was screaming. Glass shattered as bullets punched through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden where Gianni had cried over Alphonse just days ago. Alphonse materialized beside her wheelchair like a ghost, his gun drawn, his expression locked in combat mode. "We're leaving. Now." "No." Gianni's voice was surprisingly steady for someone currently being shot at. "This isn't a negotiation." He grabbed her wheelchair handles, trying to push her toward the exit. She locked her wheels. "I said no." Another explosion rocked the compound. Closer this time. More gunfire. Someone shouted that they'd breached the south perimeter. Bonano was barking orders, his men coordinating defensive positions, but Gianni could hear it in their voices. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Gianni, please." Alphonse's voice cracked. "I can't lose you. I can't." "Then stay." She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Stay with me. I need a laptop. Now." Understanding flooded his face. Protocol Omega, she confirmed. For 3 seconds, 3 eternities, Alphonse stood frozen between his orders to evacuate her and his promise to earn her trust. Then he made his choice. He holstered his gun, grabbed a laptop from Bonano's sideboard, and dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair. "You're insane," he said, booting up the system. "You're still here," she countered. "Because I love you, you terrifying woman." Bullets shattered the window behind them, showering them with glass. Gianni barely flinched as she pulled up Protocol Omega's interface. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her father's passwords, the authentication sequences, the final authorization screen. One button, one press, nuclear option. Around them, the battle raged, men screaming, guns firing, Bonano shouting coordinates to his lieutenants, the smell of gunpowder and blood and expensive carpet burning. Somewhere in the chaos, someone yelled that the Calabreses had brought at least 40 men, that they were pushing through the main entrance, that this was it. Gianni hovered over the activation key. Her hand trembled. "If I do this," she said, looking at Alphonse through the smoke and chaos, "there's no going back. Everything changes. For everyone." Alphonse grabbed her free hand, squeezed it tight. His face was bleeding from a glass cut. His tuxedo was torn, and he'd never looked more beautiful. "Then let's go forward." Gianni pressed enter. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then her father's face appeared on screen, pre-recorded, posthumous, perfect, and said clearly, "Protocol Omega activated. Files deploying. God help us all." The screen filled with progress bars. Uploads to FBI field offices, the New York Times server, the Washington Post, CNN, every rival family's secure channels. Automated emails to prosecutors, journalists, federal agents. 30 years of evidence. Released simultaneously. Unstoppable. "It's done," Gianni whispered. Alphonse pulled out his phone, checking secure channels. His expression shifted from fear to disbelief, to something like awe. Federal raids just started on Calabrese holdings. Simultaneous hits on their warehouses, their businesses, their homes. Every law enforcement agency in New York just got the biggest case of their careers gift-wrapped with a bow. The gunfire slowed. Stopped. Someone shouted confused, panicked that they were receiving withdrawal orders. Bonano appeared through the smoke, his suit torn, blood on his face, his expression stunned. "What did you do?" "I ended it," Gianni said simply. Through the shattered windows, they could hear sirens. Lots of them, getting closer. The Calabrese attackers were retreating, their coordination collapsing into chaos as they realized they were no longer soldiers in a mob war but fugitives from federal warrants. Within minutes, the compound was silent except for the wounded and the distant sirens. Gianni looked at the laptop screen. At the confirmation that every file had deployed successfully, that her father's nuclear option had detonated exactly as designed, the Calabrese family wouldn't just lose this fight, they'd lose everything. "You saved us," Alphonse said quietly. "You saved everyone." "No," Gianni corrected, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "My father saved us. I just pushed the button." Bonano knelt beside her wheelchair, this powerful, dangerous man looking at her with something approaching reverence. George would be proud, and absolutely terrified. "Good," Gianni said, tears finally coming. "That's how I know I did it right." Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and whether you think Protocol Omega was genius or insanity. I'll be reading every single one. Now let's see what happens when the dust finally settles. The dust took 3 days to settle. 3 days of federal raids, arrests, and news coverage that made Watergate look like a parking ticket. The Calabrese family imploded spectacularly. Vincent arrested at his granddaughter's baptism. Paolo caught trying to board a private jet to Monaco. Luca found hiding in a storage unit in Jersey City, eating gas station sandwiches and crying. It would have been funny if Gianni's mother wasn't dead and she could still walk. The summons came on day 4. The 5 families' council requested her presence. Not demanded, requested. Which meant they were scared, confused, or both. Probably both. "You don't have to go," Alphonse said, watching her get ready in her guest suite that had become less guest and more permanent. "You've already won. The Calabreses are done." "You could walk away," he winced. Poor choice of words. "You could leave. Take your inheritance. Disappear. And let them think I'm afraid?" Gianni applied lipstick with the precision of someone preparing for war. "Not a chance." The council met in a private room at an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan that definitely had bodies buried in its foundation. Gianni wheeled in, flanked by Bonano and Alphonse, and the silence that fell was delicious. 5 men, old, powerful, dangerous, sat around a table that had probably hosted 1,000 backroom deals, all of them staring at her like she was a bomb that might detonate. "Miss Rogers, the eldest, Salvatore Genovese, began carefully. "We appreciate you coming. We wanted to discuss the situation." "You mean the complete destabilization of the Calabrese family and the exposure of everyone who did business with them?" Gianni wheeled forward. "That situation? Your father's Protocol Omega was extreme." "My father's Protocol Omega saved my life," Gianni corrected. "And yours, probably." The Calabreses were planning to hit Bonano's compound and kill anyone who might have opposed their takeover. "You all would have been next." Murmurs around the table. She'd done her homework. They knew she was right. Nevertheless, another boss, Carmine Luciano, said stiffly, "You've caused significant disruption. Federal attention. Investigations. We've lost resources, contacts, years of careful cultivation." "Good." The word dropped like a grenade. "Excuse me?" Luciano's face reddened. Gianni wheeled to the head of the table, to her father's empty chair, the seat George Rogers had occupied for 37 years. She positioned herself directly in front of it, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I'm Gianni Rogers. George Rogers was my father. I'm claiming his seat, his holdings, and his legacy. But I'm doing it my way." "Absolutely not," someone started. "Half the empire goes legitimate," Gianni continued, her voice cutting through the protests. "Real businesses, clean money, legitimate operations. The other half stays strategic, controlled, careful, and absolutely no civilian harm. No more car bombs that kill mothers and paralyze children. No more turf wars that catch bystanders. No more treating human lives like they're disposable." Salvatore laughed. Actually laughed. "And who exactly do you think you are, little girl? You've been in this world for 2 weeks. You think you can just walk in here?" He caught himself. "You think you can roll in here and rewrite 100 years of tradition?" "I think," Gianni said calmly, "that I just took down the Calabrese family with one button press. I think I have files on every person in this room. My father was very thorough. I think you're all terrified of what else George left me. And I think," she smiled, cold and certain, "I think you need me a lot more than I need you." The room erupted. Voices overlapping, threats and protests and outrage. "Who's going to enforce your rules?" Carmine demanded. "You?" From that chair? Before Gianni could respond, Alphonse stepped forward. He placed his hand on her shoulder, not protective, but equal. A statement of partnership, and his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd killed for less. I am. He looked at each boss in turn. We are. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with Protocol Omega, Part 2. The bluff was magnificent. There was no Part 2. But nobody in that room was willing to bet on it. Bonano, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. George Rogers was the smartest man I ever knew. And his daughter just proved she inherited that gift. I vote to accept her terms. This is insane, someone muttered. So was letting the Calabreses operate unchecked, Bonano countered. So was 40 years of unnecessary violence and federal attention. Gianni's right. We're not thugs anymore. We're a dynasty. Or we're dinosaurs. Your choice. The vote took 20 minutes of arguing, threats, and political maneuvering that would have made Congress jealous. But in the end, fear won. Fear of Protocol Omega. Fear of federal investigations. Fear of the woman in the wheelchair who'd brought down an empire before her father was cold in the ground. The motion passed. 4-1. Gianni Rogers had her father's seat. 6 months later, the Rogers Foundation for Mobility Justice opened its doors in a renovated building in downtown Brooklyn. State-of-the-art accessibility, legal advocacy for disabled individuals, job training programs, adaptive technology resources, all funded by very clean money from very questionable sources. Gianni stood well, sat at the ribbon-cutting ceremony in a designer suit, flanked by Alphonse in his role as Foundation Director of Security. The press was there. Politicians who didn't ask too many questions. Community leaders who cared more about results than origins. As she cut the ribbon to applause, Alphonse leaned down and whispered, "Your father would be proud." Gianni smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as she looked at the building, at the people, at the legitimate legacy being built on illegitimate foundations. No, he'd be terrified, and that's how I know I'm doing it right. That night, in the penthouse Gianni now owned George's safe house. Cleaned and renovated, she and Alphonse sat on the balcony, overlooking the city her father had helped rule from the shadows. "Do you think we can actually pull this off?" she asked. "The legitimate business thing? Changing how things work?" Alphonse took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think if anyone can transform a criminal empire into something resembling ethical, while still maintaining enough power to be untouchable, it's you. That's either the sweetest or most terrifying compliment I've ever received. Why not both?" He kissed her hand. "You're the woman who weaponized accounting and brought down a mob family. Sweet and terrifying is kind of your brand now." Gianni laughed, real and genuine, the sound carrying across the balcony into the New York night. Somewhere out there, her father's legacy was being rewritten. Somewhere out there, the Calabrese family was rotting in federal prison. Somewhere out there, the world kept spinning, and Gianni Rogers, the girl who wasn't supposed to matter, who was supposed to stay small and scared and hidden, was writing her own story, and it was just getting started. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share this with everyone who needs to hear about Gianni Rogers and her journey. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Was it the wine incident? Protocol Omega? That final confrontation? Your support means everything. This is just the beginning of Gianni's empire. Stay tuned.